start recording and get started. So welcome everyone to our first monthly user group meeting of 2021. It's exciting. Can't believe we're already almost a month into 2021. It's amazing, but happy to have everyone here and welcome. Let's see. So just to review the purpose of these monthly meetings, every third Thursday of the month just provides a time and space for everyone to get together, to network, to learn a little bit about what each other are doing, and as well as receive updates that Stroud may have to offer. The time will always be the same from 2:30 to 3:30, and we'll try our best to keep to that schedule. I know everyone's time is very valuable, and the Zoom link will always be the same, but we will continue to send out our reminder email a week prior to the meeting. So feel free to share to any volunteers or anyone who may be interested in attending. The attendees of the meeting are groups working in the Delaware River Watershed. They may or may not be working within the DRWI, but people working with the monitoring stations. So again, the goals are just to create a time and space to check in, to ask questions, report any issues, and to network among each other. Today, we are going to be having just our station owner manager presentation and not have a focus topic presentation. We'll get back to those next month. So we're gonna have them communicate about their individual situation going on. But all of this is to help support gathering good data and using it purposefully. So our Stroud Center facilitators, we have myself, Rachel Johnson. Dave Bressler, unfortunately, isn't able to join us today. We also have Krista Reeves here and Shannon Hicks. So if you have any questions, you can point your questions to them or any of us in the chat. And we also have Carol Armstrong joining us today, part of our Master Watershed Steward Facilitator. Just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded, so please stay muted unless you have a question, and also you can put your questions in the chat. The recordings will be available under our Wiki Watershed page at wikiwatershed.org/DRWI. So if you want to go back and reference any of the material in past meetings, that's where you can find it, as well as this meeting will be posted there. So today's agenda, we're going to switch it up just a little bit. So we're going through our introduction now, really briefly. And we have just a brief Stroud Center update that we will cover after our owner manager presentation, just to give them the time and space that they need, because we have a really interesting topic to present about today. We don't have a focus topic today. We're going to get back to that next month, like I said. And then after the owner manager presentation, we'll just open it up for open discussion, any questions, either about the manager presentation or just general questions that you may have. And then very briefly, we'll go over a conclusion, which is just talking about next month's meeting, the topics that will be covered, and any extra information that we may have. So how about we just save our questions so we can get right into our monthly station owner manager presentation, which will be by Christine Rogers and Juniper Leifer. Christine Rogers is part of the Walk Hill Watershed Management Group, and Juniper is part of the Lapatcon Creek Initiative. And they're going to be talking about how they're using their data I guess so we'll let them describe it a little bit more, but there's a watershed characterization report that Dave Bressler helped them put together and how they're using it to inform decision-making within their watershed. So with all of that being said, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Juniper and Christine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juniper Lifer. I am the program manager for the Lopatron Creek Initiative. And Christine Rogers and I are super excited to shake things up a little bit today. She's going to go through a really comprehensive presentation on what brought us to this conversation. And then I'm going to come back at the end and try to frame a discussion that we'd really like to have with all of you, because we feel like there are some very valuable opinions in this group that can help us take direction with what we're doing. So hang in tight. Hopefully it's going to be a wild ride, and I hope it's going to be productive. At the tail end of this, after our conversation, I will be sending out a survey so that you can continue to kind of chew on the conversation that we have and add additional thoughts. And maybe we'll have a follow-up discussion on all of this again later, depending on how productive our conversation is. So I'm super excited to see what Christine has to say. And without further ado, I will toss this off to her and I will see you guys back at the end.
All right, thanks so much, Juniper. So I'm going to just share my screen, pull up the PowerPoint, and then we'll get started. Okay, can everyone see that? All right, perfect. So my name is Christine Rogers, and I am the Watershed Education and Outreach Specialist for the Wallkill River Watershed Management Group. And we're an organization that's based in Sussex County, New Jersey, which is in the northernmost region of New Jersey, as you can see from the red marking. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is how we develop this watershed characterization report to with Dave and with Juniper to really hone in on the pollen skill and help local decision makers come to smart watershed decisions. So this is the watershed where we're working. This is the pollen scale, which is located in Sussex County. And specifically, our sensor is located within Newton, New Jersey, which is the headwaters of the pollen scale. So if you've ever been to Sussex County, it is a really rural county. We do have a lot of forested land and a lot of farmland, but Newton is the one exception. So this is really what we call the urbanized area of Sussex County. There's a lot of impervious surfaces that have a big impact on our waterways. So my sensor is located at the campus of Sussex County Community College, which you can see in this map. So the sensor itself is where the star is located. But just like any other college campus, there's a lot of open lawn area. We have a lot of parking lots to deal with. But what is unique in this area are these large ponds that are on the campus. There's a number of these stormwater ponds, and they were created back in the 50s by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it was a mechanism for stormwater management. But what we're finding now is that these are contributing to some negative effects within the watershed. So this is the map of the watershed that drains to my sensor, and you can see most of it is occupied by the community college, but there are also some upstream landowners, including some residential neighborhoods and farms that also drain to the site. Now, what is also unique about my location is that the entire stretch of stream is piped. So this is a piped headwaters area. The stream originates above Little Horton Pond, and then by the time it gets to the Little Horton Pond, it's already in a pipe. It's piped from Little Horton Pond to the bigger pond, and then piped again. And as you go along College Hill Road, there's about a 150-foot stretch where it daylights, but then it goes right back to the pipe. So these two branches of the stream do join together in the middle of those athletic fields, and then it discharges where the star is located at my sensor. So when we look at the impacts on the watershed, there are several different features at the community college that are negatively impacting the health of the river. So we have these large lawn covered areas where we're obviously going to have fertilizer and pesticide runoff. This picture was taken in the wintertime, so it's not as green as the lawns typically look, but you can imagine how much runs off from these areas. Same thing with this image. And then this is one of the smaller ponds on campus. It is a retention basin. It holds water all year long. And when you have those ponds, it acts as a storage mechanism that holds the water, and it will heat up in the summertime. So that's going to elevate our water temperature in the summertime and really negatively affect temperatures downstream. So this is the smaller of the two ponds, and this is Horton Pond. So you can see that they mow right up to the edge of the banks all the way around. In the summertime, it does get covered with algae, and the school typically will apply all herbicide, and it becomes this really unnatural aqua color. They have very few shrubs along the edges and no trees all the way around. And part of that has to do with the fact that they have this annual fishing tournament, that they like the pond to be open for that access. Further impacts in the watershed have to do with the impervious surfaces. So there are a lot of parking lots for student parking. And when you have those hard surfaces, you're going to have runoff. And when you have that runoff and the water flows over the pavement, it's going to collect road salt, and it's going to collect any oil from the cars, and all of that's going to run down into your watershed and into your river. So what is happening on sites like this is in the summertime, we're having the water is really being heated up by the hot sun in the summer, and that is discharging this really elevated temperature water into our river. So this is the section of the Pollenskill River where the sensor is located. And the Pollenskill is one of the biggest tributaries we have in New Jersey that drains to the Delaware. You can see that my sensor is located in this pool area, and it's right below where the pipes discharge. So you can see there are two pipes. My sensor is located directly next to that. And the big one on your left, that collects all the stormwater runoff. The smaller one on your right-hand side is where we believe that it's collecting all of the, it's like the drainage tile collection for the athletic field. So it's drying out the fields, but it's also in the process, it's contributing all of the different contaminants from the field itself into the Pollenskill. So this is contributing to some different trends in the data that we're observing. So we have found that there has been elevated conductivity in my sensor readings. So from the beginning of 2019 through the middle of last year, the average conductivity was at 865 micro Siemens per centimeter, which exceeds state and federal standards. The conductivity spikes have frequently occurred in the wintertime, and that would obviously be caused by the road salt application. So we have a lot of snow that we get in Sussex County during the winter, but what is really unique about our situation is how high the base flow conductivity levels are year round, and it's typically over 800. So why is that? We're trying to pinpoint what is causing these elevated levels year round, because we can't only explain it from the wintertime spikes from road salt. Because of some of those earlier trends that we were seeing, there was a grab sample that was taken in the middle of 2019, and that does exceed New Jersey state standards for chronic chloride. So because of this compounding evidence that we're finding, we did more and more kind of sleuthing to find out why these trends are occurring. So I was really happy to have Krista come up and help me the day before Thanksgiving do a little more investigation. So we took a handheld meter and started working our way down the watershed. So we weren't able to find the channel above Little Horton Pond. It's an intermittent stream, so there was not water to test above the pond, but we started at the pond and saw progressively as we moved downstream that the specific conductance level continued to go up and up. Now, where you see the 277, that's an area where we started to notice a spike, and it's a very close proximity, only a couple hundred feet, maybe 200 feet at the most, between where we got the reading of 277 to 485. So that's a big jump, and we want to know why that is. And then there was another huge jump from the 485 to where my sensor was reading. So this is some of the initial data that we're continuing to investigate. Obviously, we have to look at the other branch of the pollen scale that flows through this campus moving forward for the other pond that we didn't track. But you can see that something is going on, and it's causing us to question why this is occurring. And is this really a product of just the wintertime salt levels, or is this something else going on? So what is the cause? Obviously, we think salt application is a factor, because we did see the spikes that sometimes go between 1,000 and 4,000 microsiemens per centimeter, but it is year-round elevated conductivity. So there could be residual salt in the soil. We're also considering, could it be elevated in some way because of limestone that's in the area and common in the pollen scale? But is it something else? So when Krista and I were out there in November, we did notice this well-like structure. It might be a former well, we're not positive, but we need to have a further conversation with the facilities director at the school. Because when you look at this site, there's nothing that screams that this should have such high levels of conductivity. They don't store salt in this region. There is not a big parking lot nearby. It's really just office buildings. So we need to determine why this is and what is the cause. Another trend that we're seeing in the data is this elevated temperature, especially in the summertime months. And the temperature at my sensor is exceeding the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection daily maximum temperature levels. And you can see that when you look at the trout production daily maximum and the trout maintenance in the summertime, it is getting above those levels. Now, obviously, when we think back to what John Jackson was talking about at a previous meeting, we know that when we have this elevated temperature and elevated conductivity in the same area, that becomes problematic, because the salt is going to have more of an effect on the biota when we have the elevated temperatures as well. So this is something we are concerned about. Now, this is a graph that Keith from Trout Unlimited helped me produce. So the two criteria that you're looking at, the bottom brown line, that's when you start seeing the onset of stress in stock trout. And then the upper line, that's where when you hit that critical thermal maximum temperature, that's when you start seeing 50% of your trout populations are going to die when you reach that level. Now, the reason we tried to structure this graph in this way is because there are a lot of anglers in Sussex County, and this is something that they're concerned about. And this is what we're going to discuss as Juniper and I move through our presentation, because we need to structure our recommendations in a way that reaches the target population that we're trying to reach. So this is a graph looking at a comparison of my sensor to some reference streams. At Sussex County Community College, that would be the blue line that you're seeing. And then the other two are reference streams. Now, these are all three are pretty much the same, in the same area, about the same size, but the main difference is that the reference streams are in highly forested watersheds, whereas my stream is not. So because that riparian buffer has been removed near the headwaters, it is heating up the water, especially when you have those large ponds and you have all of those impervious surfaces contributing to the problem as well. And this is another graph that you can look at, which really shows that there's something different going on in my sensor than some of the other ones, because you would expect that near the headwaters where my sensor is located, that we would have cooler summertime temperatures. And as you move downstream, you would have elevated summer temperatures because of all the impacts from stormwater and different runoff in the area. Never mind that the size of the stream is getting larger as well. So because we have near the source or near the natural springs in the area, because we have such elevated temperature in this area compared to others, that's telling us that something is going on in this watershed, and especially on this campus, that we can try to change. And we have to do a little bit more investigating just to make sure that there's no large groundwater influence in other portions of the watershed. But this is an initial graph that tells us that something is going on at the community college, and we need to do more investigating. So the real reason Juniper and I are presenting today, that was all the backstory, but the reason we're here today is to talk about how we came up with this establishment of what we're calling an executive summary. So Dave sent out a while ago an EnviroDIY survey where he was asking for feedback for this program. Juniper and I are not scientists. We don't pretend to be. We don't have the technical science background. We're communicators to the public. So what we said we needed from Stroud is we need more help interpreting the data. What is our sensor telling us? We don't want to be collecting data for the sake of just collecting data. We want to actually be doing something to advance that data and to really cause change in the watershed for the better. So Dave, once he heard that we needed additional help, he said, all right, I'm going to produce this watershed characterization report. So he created this 25-page document that had all of this great information about trends that we're seeing in the data, where some of the shortfalls are, where we need to create additional analysis or do more investigating. But what Juniper and I said was that this is great, Dave, but some of the people we work with, they're not going to want to read a 25-page document. So because we work with some of these local stakeholders, municipal officials, administration of the college, residents living in the area, we needed something that was shorter, punchier, got right to the point, and really communicated the main findings early on in the report. So what we did is we developed this executive summary. So we took the information that Dave provided, and we're in the process of creating this water quality report for the pollen scale. And we're using the pollen scale as an example, and then we're going to replicate it in Juniper's watershed as well. But the idea is that we're taking the information that's the most important in the 25-page document, and we're kind of front loading it. We're putting it all in the beginning. Now, the executive summary is a standalone document that should be able to be read on its own, but it also can be accompanied by the longer report for anyone who wants to read that full analysis. The components would be that we would start with a map of the watershed and some of that watershed context. So for the pollen scale, it would reference that my site is in the headwaters, it's in Newton, it's at the community college, and the fact that it's a piped stream. But then we want to talk about the causes of impairments and what are some of these concerning trends in the data that we're seeing. Now, we structured this in a way that we recognize, because we communicate with the public, that not everyone cares about water quality. Frankly, some people don't. So we need to communicate it in a way that's the most impactful for the locals that we're dealing with. We highlighted the elevated conductivity and the elevated temperatures that have been found in my watershed, but tied that in to things that some residents would be concerned about. Human health concerns, the impact to wildlife, including fish and macroinvertebrates and amphibians. For temperature, we want to link it to the trout populations, because like I said, we have a lot of anglers in our area, and they would be concerned how the impact on this stream is going to impact recreation. Now, we made sure that we included graphs of all of our data to ensure that people know that there's real science involved, but we don't want to overload it with science. We want to get to the points and end with recommendations for our stakeholders. And the way it's structured is that each report would have specific recommendations for the individual stakeholders that are working in the area. Because we want to bring everyone along in the process. We don't want anyone to say that, oh, this is the community college's problem. It's not our problem. We didn't cause it. because we're environmental educators, we want to pull everyone into the fold and get them to really understand that if everyone contributes to the problem of causing watershed pollution, they need to be involved in trying to, get this solution going. So the idea is that this executive summary is going to inform locals about what data is being collected. And then when they know more about the data that's being collected and some of the potential impairments in the watershed, they're going to be more likely to want to implement those changes. So right now, I'm going to talk about how the data is being used. So I've been in conversations with the community college administration, and we're talking about how we can really implement practices that are going to benefit water quality as a whole. We want to improve the watershed health in the headwaters because that's going to impact the waterways downstream, and it's going to have more of an impact on some of our restoration that we have been doing further downstream. Our organization has been working closely with the Nature Conservancy for years to implement forested buffers downstream. But when the water is contaminated already near the source by the community college, we need to implement projects there as well. So I've been working with the community college administration as well as the facilities director. And we now have a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to begin implementing some of these practices that we're talking about. Specifically, this grant will fund stormwater management on the SCCC Community College campus, and then also in some of the local schools within the town of Newton. We're going to be doing porous asphalt installation this coming year. And what's going to happen is the way porous asphalt works is that it looks just like traditional pavement, but it has tiny spaces in between each of the stones that allows water to soak through. And when you have that water soaking through and it's getting into the soil beneath, you're going to have less runoff. And when you have less runoff, you're going to have less pollution. So you're going to have less of the road salt getting into the river. You're going to have less motor oil. And also, it's going to reduce the flashiness of the streams in Newton as well, because you're having fewer gallons of water that would get to the stream off of this campus. So we think this could have a big impact. And that picture is of a site in the neighboring town where we've already installed porous asphalt in Hampton Township's elementary school. So we know it can work. We know that it does have an impact, and the school has really liked it so far. So the fact that the community college has signed on to this is pretty exciting, and we're looking to find ways to continue to build on that effort. Obviously, this isn't going to solve all the problems, but to get them to sign on to projects is a big step forward, and we can do this incrementally and really have positive change. So this is a list that I took right from the executive summary, and it just gives you an example of how the report is structured to call out individual stakeholders. So the community college administration and local environmental organizations and municipal officials. So for the community college, their recommendations are really about better planning for the future and this long-term planning. Can they change some of their practices to reduce the amount of salt that they use during the storms that we get in the wintertime? Is there opportunities to remove any of those ponds? Can we daylight portions of the stream? Can we install riparian buffers on sections of the stream where it is outside of the pipe? Now, at the local environmental organizational level, a big part of that, what we can do is do a little bit more investigating, monitoring, tracking some of the data and some of the trends that we're seeing with our sensor, but also educating the public and dealing with residents who live in the area, doing that general outreach to get everyone to understand what the trends we're seeing in the data are and what they can do about it. So even working at the individual homeowner level to implement practices, whether it's additional tree plantings or removal of some impervious surfaces at their homes. That kind of effort, I think, could go a long way within this township. And then at the municipal level, working to enhance stormwater ordinances within the town. And then also looking into the opportunities for the establishment of stormwater utilities that can fund some of these municipal stormwater management programs. So this is how the report is structured, but it's structured in a way to make sure that everyone has a stake in the game. We want to ensure that everyone feels that they can make a difference, and this isn't something that can just be passed on to the community college administration to deal with. This is a watershed-wide problem that needs to be addressed. So the idea is that we're piloting this effort in the Pollenskill, but that this process can be replicated in order to produce greater results. So what's happening is it's starting in the Pollenskill. Juniper and Dave have been a big help in this effort, and we're creating this document that is going to be shared with all of you. The next step is to do further testing in Lopakon Creek, which is where Juniper works. And you can see it's circled in yellow. It's in Warren County, New Jersey, right near the Delaware. And what we want to do is make sure that we have this process going and an executive summary template that can be shared and utilized throughout the entire basin. We want to make sure that we're actually doing something with all of this vast amount of data that's being collected, because that's where we're going to get to the most change. So what's happening now is we're finalizing the report, and it's going to be shared via Wiki Watershed. But we want to hear your initial thoughts today, and I want to turn it over to Juniper to really begin the discussion, and what you guys see could be the potential of this effort. But thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing at this point.
Excellent. Well, Christine, you did an outstanding job. Thank you so much for such a great presentation. Yeah, I just wanted to talk for a couple of minutes in advance of our conversation, because what we really want to do today is hear from you. And I know that the story that Christine just told involved a lot of really great science, and you guys are used to really digging into the science, but that's not what we're going to do today. We're going to dig into the notion of communicating that science and stay out of the weeds of the specific science. We really want to explain to you how we came to the idea to put together this report, and see if you guys agree that it might have some application for your work in your watersheds. So again, I told you we'll have a quick discussion, and I will also add a survey to the chat at the end and send it in an email as a follow-up, so that you guys can kind of chew on the thoughts a little bit and send any follow-ups and really think about it over time. Because I am of the opinion, and I know Christine is also, that this is really the next step. This is really the next level. This is the stage where we get to take all of this brilliant work we've been doing and use it to change the world. And, you know, we have a lot of experience as storytellers, but like she said, we have no experience as scientists, but we're often asked to tell the story. And when we tell the story of our citizen science program, you can see it's a brilliant story. We've got great questions. We've got great missions that we're on. The problem is that, you know, it kind of ends up being a bit of a cliffhanger. We're like, so we found this big problem, and then we found out why it's happening. And then what? You know, so the question is, what is going to be done about it? And that's the kind of stuff that Christine and I are usually engaged in through our advocacy work, you know, really promoting the different projects and behavior changes that are going to help to improve water quality. So how do we get this story of the citizen science program to produce results? Well, we have to make sure people are aware of what we're doing. So we need to tell the public and all of those decision makers the story. But we need to be careful to do it in a way that's comprehensive and makes sense. Because the people who have the greatest influence over things that might improve water quality aren't any more a scientist than Christine and I. They don't understand the details on the level that many of you often do. I sit at these meetings, and I got to tell you, I'm impressed, but my mind is often blown, and I just feel like the kid at the back of the classroom, you know, who's not taking enough notes. at the same time, when your brilliance is explained to me, in simple layman's terms, I've got the communication skills to take that to someone else and use that information to hopefully influence them, to make changes and adopt projects. And that's the kind of stuff Christine and I have always done. So just to add a little bit of context to it, many of you, I believe, work within the DRWI. So you have partners to deal with. Christine and I are in one of the larger clusters, so there's a lot of negotiation goes on when we're planning, okay? And you are also aware that William Penn sort of expects there to be, a water quality outcome attached to everything that we invest our time in. If they fund us to work on something, we need to have a direct, tangible outcome attached to it. And you and I, we can all argue about whether or not that's actually plausible, but the reality is that's what's expected of us. And so when we're negotiating with our partners and we're telling them about this great, valuable citizen science program that has so much possibilities and we can learn more and more and more, their next question is, okay, and what are you going to do with it? What project is going to be implemented as a result of your collecting all this brilliant data? And those are fair questions that we've constantly sort of had to dodge. And up until this point, we've been able to prove the value of collecting all this data to work with, the communities that we work with and to engage volunteers. But it continues to be a challenge. And as we move through the phases, there's only a greater pressure on producing results. So that's something that Christine and I face an awful lot. And we also, as advocates and project-oriented people, have a lot of experience working with other partners who are brilliant, just like Stroud. And one example of that is the Rutgers Cooperative Extension Water Resources Program. So, she and I, Christine and I, have implemented projects all over our watersheds, rain gardens that are promoted by Rutgers. And you can find these reports that they create online. We can talk about them more in depth later. But just as a concept, these are really complicated information presented in comprehensive layman's terms. You don't have to be an engineer to understand the engineering that's explained in this report. And it tells, these individuals, who are reading it, the officials that we hand it to, what's really going on, and why it should matter to their community. So that people like Christine and I can walk in with the added legitimacy of Rutgers University, or Stroud Water Research, and make the case for the issues at hand in a way that, like Christine explained, really touches them in a way that helps them understand that this does have an impact on them. So that's pretty much how I want to frame the conversation. I want to get an understanding of if you guys have identified issues in your data that you feel could be addressed, and that if you were able to communicate those issues in a comprehensive way, is there an audience for you to approach so that you could maybe use that data to convince the powers that be to do something about the problems that you've identified? So we're wondering if you're feeling the same way, if we could create some action-oriented reports that really, like I said, change the world. We're all about changing the world. And my last point before I roll into the discussion and hear from all of you is just, the notion of the DRWI, and again, I think you're all familiar, is the idea of layering different strategies all in the same region. And it's also the idea of layering different skill sets. And the truth is, I've tried to be a scientist because I love this program so much. I've tormented Krista in the process. She does not want me to keep trying to be a scientist. At this point, she's like, okay, I'll be the scientist. You be the lady who goes to the mayor and says, please do something with this science. So just the notion that if we all play our roles in the most effective way, we can make things happen. I am never going to be a great scientist, and there may be some other folks who are brilliant scientists who will never be able to convince a mayor and council that doesn't like the environment to build a rain garden. So it's all about us doing what we're best at so that we can make things happen and make this collaborative organizational structure really productive. And now I really want to know what you guys think of all that. Did I cover everything, Christine? Okay, so who has a thought?
Could I
Yeah, I
share
have
my
a-
thoughts?
I have
Again, this is my first, participation in this meeting. I'm very grateful for what you described, like the data, analyzing it, putting it in bullets, having it be simplistic is very positive. I do a lot of that work in healthcare, so I can really empathize with the challenge you had putting that together, but it was well done. The challenge that I think we have, like I'm in New York State, Port Jervis, town of Deer Park, and we've got a town board, a town planning board, we've got a county planning department, we've got the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. It's like, how do you present this data to them in a way that will make sense and will be a catalyst for change? And I think what you're saying is, it's like engagement, collaboration, be assertive, like don't be dogmatic, don't be holier than thou. It's really a verbal, like an engagement skill that I was not born with, and I'm trying to get better at in my work in Deer Park, because we have a resistant town board, we have a resistant planning board. How do you get these people to begin to understand this is a risk issue and we need to do something about runoff, watershed, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So I can empathize with what you're talking about, and I think trying to come up with a way to gather the data like you folks did, I think it was well done. How do you present that, and then how do you be like persistent, assertive over time to get them to pay attention to it and not
Right.
give up? So
Yeah,
that's
I
that's
can
my
I can
take.
sense it. That's really the same experience that I have had out here. Live and work in a watershed where there's not a lot of interest in the green movement. You can't talk to these guys about rainbows and butterflies, and wouldn't it be nice if we clean the water? For whatever reason, they're not interested. And so I think that it's almost the presentation that we're making is sort of to address that exact obstacle that you speak of, because you walking in talking about these issues doesn't mean a heck of a lot. But when you've got the legitimacy of the Stroud Water Research Center behind you, and you say these legitimate, experienced, well-known scientists have looked specifically at what's going on our stream, and they have these proven recommendations to address it. And again, the report is comprehensive in the sense that it explains, conductivity is a problem, sodium chloride could create these health issues in your community. And guess what? Those problems are happening in your watershed. Here's a quick comprehensive
And
chart
the
to
way
explain
you
it.
related it to fish
Right.
viability, very well done, because that's something that people have an interest in terms of their daily, weekly, monthly recreation. So that and like I've been engaging this town board for 30 years with limited success. So how do you connect with something that will interest them to move it in the right direction? And then the other thing is the data is valid and reliable, and it's really important, like bullets, boom, 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 temperature, conductivity. What does that mean? That was really well done in that stuff you presented.
I think what we really need to do is come up with a comprehensive list of economic values. There was a really great report that came out about 20 years ago about the economic value of ecosystem services. And
Yes.
so if we start putting dollar amounts on what it means to lose ecosystem services, what it means to lose recreational dollars, what it means to lose ecotourism, that starts to make sense. And I think that's the only way to communicate with people who are on, town boards and things like this, planning boards. You can only talk to them in certain terms.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we need to come up with that set way, not in a set way, but, have things quantified.
Absolutely. Well, there's also cost of inaction. We've,
Right.
we've identified this problem. You can ignore this problem, but at some point that problem is going to become a big, if you ignore this, erosion over here, you can do that for a couple of years, but eventually the Walmart's going to flood out down the road,
Right.
So
This is
and
what
the
it
cost
costs
of
to clean
inaction.
the salt out of your water to drink it.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Who else has
Juniper,
some
this is
thoughts?
John.
Where
There
are
are some DRWI examples that you might be able to pirate return on environment that will have a fishing, the economic value of fishing. It's
Mhm.
usually done at a county level, but the base calculation could be used for watershed like the Pollens Kill based on area. You might poke around and see if anybody has done that across it within the Jersey Highlands cluster, that return on the environment. At this point, it almost seems formulaic, but I've never done it.
Right.
And they cover all sorts of things, but if you wanted to go right for fishing, there is a recreational thing. The other thing that's really important to remind them is, and I would add to any of your data sets, grab a data set that's got the last 30, 40 years and show how conductivity or salt is going up. There is no reason it's going to go down unless we do something else. So if we don't start planning now, it doubled in the last decade, say, and it'll double again, whatever the doubling rate, that's how you make it appear to them that this is going to be an increasing problem. You don't have to go to climate change for the salt thing. It's just the accumulation of salts through de-icing programs.
Right. I
And
think
then
the other
something
element.
else,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll keep this brief. I don't want to
Go.
monopolize this talk, but like you mentioned, the Nature Conservancy, I know a lot about that group. I'm a member. I've done some work with them in the distant past, but like how to like collaborate with these not-for-profits, like the Orange County Land Trust, the Open Space Institute. It's like how to engage people in a way that will make them pay attention. It's like assertive, not arrogant. It's a verbal engagement skill that maybe we can all benefit from getting better at.
Oh, absolutely. By me, I'm an expert in that because I'm probably as about liberal as you can get. But there's no place for eco warriors where I live. That they would slam the door in my face the second I showed up if that was the angle that I approached them with. So
Yep.
even though they all are well aware of who I am and where I stand, I present myself as a reasonable player. And the fact is, it's about building partnerships. It's about finding that common
Exactly.
ground in the middle. That's the way you get things done. So I think that, the notion of this report, again, is to put something tangible in people's hands that explains it, that is not, coming from, one random organization, something that helps these communities understand that work is being done in their town that's associated with the DRWI. Promote the DRWI. You can assure these folks that no money would be spent, on your community studying your stream if there was not a darn good reason to do it. And nobody would be paying you to find out what's going on if there wasn't a good reason to discover that information.
And there's risk that's going to make it worse down the road. And we need to take action now. How can we do that together?
So I'm curious though, is there anybody who feels that they have identified something with their sensor data, with their monitoring station data, that they've actually been able to pinpoint a specific problem that could be addressed with some kind of a restoration or an improved policy that you could potentially advocate for if you had the resources to do it?
My name is Dave Yake. I do a lot of work with Stroud and Dave Bristler, but also in the Somerset Lake area, which is just across the Delaware border into Pennsylvania. And it's a resort area, if you will. I have two comments. The first is I like the idea of the presentation and a vehicle to organize thoughts and communicate. And the comments from Krista and John are spot on in terms of crisping it up in terms of the audience and what's going to be able to have an impact on their thinking. I was left sort of empty-handed, if you will, empty feeling in your presentation, that I really wasn't sure that you understood what the cause of the problem was, other than you want to do something about infiltration. And so, do you need help figuring out how much water is coming and where it's coming from? Because ordinarily, you know, if you have a stream of 800 microsegment conductivity all year round, it isn't coming from salt. And so it's got to be coming from somewhere deep down. And, you know, you can measure temperatures, lots of things you can do. And what I wouldn't want you to do is sort of get ahead of your technical headlights, is start to implement a solution without really understanding what the cause is. And because I think it would undermine your credibility, but I like the approach very much.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know that it's really us implementing the solutions as much as it's us having a resource that packages and explains the issue at hand, and then gives those people who have power over the decisions in those areas to think about it, to try to address those issues, to invest in studying more and on things that still have a little bit
Do you
more
need help
work
right
to do.
now studying what the problem is?
I mean, I'll leave that to Christine to answer if she needs that. But honestly, I think specifically more than getting into the details of what we've discovered in this process, I think we're trying to find out from the group if the notion of spending the time analyzing the data, producing a report, attaching an executive summary that is a little bit idiot proof, you know, if going through those motions would be something that would be helpful to organizations like yours as much as we feel it will be helpful to ours. Because Christine and I are fairly certain that once we get these reports in our hands that explain the problems that are specific to our watersheds with proven recommendations and the legitimacy of our partnership, that we can convince people to pay attention and hopefully get some projects implemented. But
'Cause
I'm
what you've got is valid, reliable data that can be a catalyst to get the people that have the resources to fix it.
right. You know, and sometimes maybe it's just resources to, you'll see in the survey I asked later, maybe you just want to package this data so that you can send it to the next funder and say, we want to know more. Here's what we know so far. You know, it's something that packages all of this work that we're doing. We're all spending a lot of time, you know, maintaining these stations, making sure that they're up and running. It's nice to know that the trends will be visualized and shared. Because if we're all doing this to talk to ourselves about it, I'm not sure what the end game is.
Juniper, I think that you're right at the point that a lot of people struggle with, and that is that which leads to action. We've found our problems. We know kind of how they are. We have some options, but it's and so I think that the group as a whole and you as a pair of partners are going to have to float some balloons and see what works with this landscape, with these landowners. You have the advantage, and I see Patty on the line here, and she has been working with us or us with her in a similar, trying to engage the university. And the nice thing about a university is you have one large landowner. But the bad thing is if they don't give a hoot, it's like talking to the wall. It's hard to build momentum when there's only one audience and they're not interested. But hopefully they are, and they have a sustainability committee. They have a sustainability plan, and then maybe part of this is not part of their plan. And so maybe that's the next step, is what we're doing down in, and I noticed Kim's not on the call this week, but down at First State National Park is trying to figure out how the stream stewards down there, who do they talk to? Is it private landowners? Is it the municipality? Is it the state? who's there. Those are your three audiences, but in the end, do you have to talk to all three at once? Is a better way to start? And I think you're ready. Try and see what the response is. And it's not, one thing that I found is it also helps to not appear as though you're playing tag and you found the problem tag, they're it. It's now their problem. It works better if it's a partnership, that we're here to help. And here's some options and how try to build that partnership.
Yeah, I think that's where the visualizations come in. Go ahead, whoever's talking.
Yeah, sorry, Juniper. We are almost at the official end time for our meeting. I know this is a conversation we can probably talk for hours on. It's extremely inspiring, and I thank you a lot, both Christine and Juniper, for sharing all that information. Having this type of template will be amazing moving forward as a group. I think it's going to be really useful for a lot of people. Yeah, I was just going to ask you, so Juniper just put a survey that would be really great if you guys could fill out. She's also going to follow up in a follow-up email with the same survey just to get more feedback on this topic and your thoughts. You can elaborate all your thoughts in that survey. But really quickly before the meeting ends, I would like to share a poll. Let's see if I hit launch polling. Should pop up, and just if you could answer these two brief questions about the information that was discussed in our meeting today, that would be really helpful. So we'll wait a little bit for people to answer.
I wasn't going to give myself a bad grade.
No, you never can. You got to get those points where they matter.
Really very helpful. Thank you.
Almost everyone has answered. We'll give it a few more seconds.
Juniper and Christine, you're working in my hometown. By the way, this is Patty Haug, the person who's trying to work through the university down here, Westchester University. And my family lives up there in Frieden. So I'm grateful that you're doing work up there.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's right down the street. So we are neighbors, definitely. But thank you all for your feedback. This will be helpful moving forward. And I think it'll be more concrete once you actually see the report, what we're thinking.
Yeah, when you see what we mean, I think that this will take shape, because the comprehensive report that Dave wrote would always be attached to it. So you'd have all this great data for the people who want to dig in and see you prove it, but you'd have a really comprehensive, understandable chart with graphs and stuff like that, that will hopefully be easy to read and act on.
Yeah, I think a lot of what this boils down to is actually not the science, it's behavioral science. It's how people perceive things. It's all about perception. It's all about, their worldview, their tunnel. And you have to tailor the message always, who's your audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for answering that poll. Share the results really quickly of that. And just before our meeting officially ends, anyone can feel free to stay on and talk more about this topic if they have the time to. Because we are at the end of our official time, we didn't really have any major Stroud Center updates. They were more of just reminders. So I'm thinking we can just go over that in the next meeting. It's all stuff that we've talked about before, mostly just what to do when your station goes offline. So we'll talk about that next meeting a little bit.
Rachel, I thought I'd just mention for everyone, you might enjoy watching this long waited for film on the Stroud Center from a series called Visionaries. The one on the Stroud Center's work is next Monday on WHYY and Delaware's public radio, which is WDPB. It's called Flow of Life. It's on at 11 p.m. on Monday, January 25th. I know I'm going to watch it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Carol. It's really an amazing film that we've put together, if you feel like watching that. Was there a link to that you could put in the chat, Carol, or any information that you have on hand?
Yeah, yeah, I think I can find something.
That'd be great. So just to wrap up, we'll mention that our next month's meeting is February 18th at the same time, same place. Hope to see you there. Scott Ensing will be talking about the turbidity data analysis that he's doing with your sensor station data across the Delaware Basin. So that should be really interesting. And that'll be followed up in the following month in March by Sarah Damiano also talking about a turbidity analysis. So that is what we're looking forward to. And again, feel free to be in touch if you would like to give a presentation like Juniper and Christine gave today. If you have any interesting topics that you have in mind, feel free to email Shannon, Dave Bressler, and myself, and we can get that set up for you to give a presentation. We would love to hear any information that you have to share. And I think that is all that I have. So we can stop share, and anyone who has a harsh 3:30 deadline, feel free to leave. But if anyone wants to stay and continue this discussion or has any general questions that they need answered, feel free to stay on.
Rachel, this is John. Just because Dave Bressler's not here, I just would like to say Dave would be interested in your feedback as you look at what Christine and Juniper produced and said, how would I do that? Or how would I use that? He would be interested in that feedback, that specific feedback. And obviously we can't do it for everybody. So the next step is figuring out how to help the process. And maybe, I hate to use automate because it makes it sound like we're going to create a website. And of course, how the hell would we do that? But you get the idea. And starting that conversation with Dave, or with Dave and Christine and Juniper, it's a process of us learning how, and every one of your sites is different and everyone serves a different purpose for you and the region. But getting some feedback would be helpful. So thank you. Feel free to fire the emails to these guys. And I sit on the sidelines and mostly just, collect a paycheck. I'm happy to do that still.
You're a great cheerleader.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have questions. I mean, now we're past the 3:30 deadline. I feel like it's open talk time.
Yeah, and actually I will stop the recording so you can feel free to say anything unrecorded.